The hits just keep on coming as Antoine Winfield Jr. is set to miss time with an ankle injury. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Tuesday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as editor-in-chief of the 813.TV. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you could support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. Stash it and trash it, and an interesting response from Todd Bowles regarding something another NFL coach said over the weekend. That's all coming up in a little bit, but let's start things off, though, with the biggest and worst news we could possibly get, and that is, of course, that Antoine Winfield Jr. suffered an ankle injury at the end of Sunday's game and is expected to miss a few weeks. Todd Bowles told the media on Monday that Antoine Winfield Jr. was in a walking boot in the facility and that they would see about him later this week. But multiple reports are saying that Winfield will be out this weekend and likely out for a few weeks. Rick Stroud tweeted that the Bucs are cautiously optimistic that Winfield will miss only 2 weeks with the ankle injury, but it could be a 3 to 4 week injury. So add that to the running tally of Buccaneers injuries: Logan Hall, Kalijah Kancey, Ernest Brown, Zion McCollum, Bryce Hall, Josh Hayes, and Antoine Winfield Jr. Of the 11 defensive backs that the Bucs kept on the roster, there is a chance that only 7 of them will be available this weekend against the Detroit Lions, which is nightmare fuel. Let's go down that rabbit hole for a minute, though, shall we? On Sunday, the only 2 active safeties were Winfield and Whitehead. So that means Kayvon Merriweather is likely getting the start opposite of Jordan Whitehead. But let's say that Zion McCollum does not clear concussion protocol and he's out. We know Bryce Hall is done for the season. And for the sake of argument, let's just go ahead and say that Josh Hayes is out as well. So what do the Buccaneers do? Jamel Dean is going to be one outside corner. That's locked, loaded. We know it. He's going to be the one primarily responsible for covering Amon-Ra St. Brown, who did not have a great night against the Rams. He's going to look to make up for that in a big way. Jared Goff is going to look to make up for that in a big way. But now the other starter and the top 2 backups are out. So that leaves Tyreek Funderburk, who was a game day inactive on Sunday against the Commanders. The most likely course of action, in my opinion, is that the Buccaneers do exactly what they did on Sunday, and they are going to line Christian Izien up on the outside. He played well at a position where he doesn't normally play, though going up against Jameson Williams is a very different situation than having to defend Zacchaeus of the Washington Commanders. From there, you activate Rashad Wisdom or Marcus Banks off of the practice squad to be a backup safety, and you have Funderburk there as a break glass in case of emergency kind of player. Tyke Smith is going to be much more reliable and much more effective as the nickel corner, and you still have some depth with Tavier Thomas as well. But now you've reached a point where one injury and the entire thing is going to go off the rails. I'm not sure the Bucs are desperate enough to go sign someone and throw them into the deep end, but there aren't many options floating out there. Xavier Howard is still out there. I talked about him over the offseason, but he comes with some serious baggage. You got J.C. Jackson, Patrick Peterson, who at this stage in his career is more of a name than, an actual productive player. Logan Ryan wasn't great, but he's available and familiar with the system. So if you're going to bring someone in from the outside, he's the best option because it is a plug and play type of situation. You really aren't going to have to get him too familiarized with a defense that he already knows. There's going to be a quick little refresher, and then he's going to be able to go to work. So those choices, flat out, completely honest, not great. Hopefully, Zion is able to clear concussion protocol and return, but that's a situation that we have to keep an eye on throughout the week. You all remember a few years ago where Antoine kept leaving games and missing time due to concussions. This may not be the last time that we see Zion McCollum leave a game and potentially miss a following game because of these concussion problems. You cannot get off to more of a love-hate relationship type of start with the Buccaneers season than what we just had. Yes, everyone is stoked and excited that they went off and they blew out the Commanders and the offense looked awesome, but at what cost? They came in banged up. They left in even worse shape than they went in, and now they're having to use every single bit of depth on the back end of their defense and even dip into the practice squad to field enough guys so that they're covered. No corners on the practice squad, just safeties, Rashad Wisdom and Marcus Banks. They both might get a call up this week. We're going to continue to update that as best we can, but you all better keep your fingers crossed that Zion McCollum is able to play. This is not a team that the Buccaneers can afford to be shorthanded against, especially in the secondary. Losing Antoine Winfield Jr. is a massive blow to the entire defense. You cannot afford to have to resort to one of your nickel corners having to transition to outside corner. It becomes an enormous mess. This game in Detroit starts the run of tough opponents for the Buccaneers. They're at Detroit, then they get Denver. Okay, that's not too big of a deal. But then Philly, at Atlanta, at New Orleans, home against Baltimore, home against Atlanta, at Kansas City, home against San Fran. The Bucs need every single win that they can get, and those are going to be hard to come by over the course of the next couple of months. In order to do that, they have to get healthy. This is looking like a massive setback to start the season. A lot of these guys are going to have to step up and have play some of the best football of their lives for weeks at a time, weeks in a row. Jamel Dean absolutely cannot get hurt. Tyke Smith cannot look like a rookie. He has to step up and play big. Jordan Whitehead, he is now the leader of the back end of that defense with Antoine Winfield Jr. out. So this is definitely something to cause some concern heading into a very difficult road game in week 2. But there's only so much you can do. It's the NFL. Injuries are going to happen. The return of Stash It and Trash It, that is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. No man wants to lose his hair, but for men, it's actually very common. And now with Hims, the solution is simple. Try Hims hair loss solution, and you'll be joining hundreds of thousands of subscribers who got their flow back. Hims provides access to a range of hair loss treatments that work all from the comfort of your couch. Hims makes treating hair loss simple with doctor-trusted treatment options and clinically proven ingredients like finasteride and minoxidil that can regrow hair in as little as 3 to 6 months. They offer personalized chewable, oral, spray, and serum treatment options so you can find what works best for you. The process is simple and 100% online. Just answer a few questions and a medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to your door. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedonnfl. That's HIMS.com/lockedonnfl for your personalized hair loss treatment. hims.com/lockedonnfl. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil. Prescription products require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for full details and important safety information. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view of the day. I'm going to tell you what we are stashing from week one coming up in just a minute, but the new Locked On NFL is here. Locked On NFL is now 2 shows every day. First, the madman Tyler Rowland kicks off your morning with a double shot of NFL espresso. Then stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. Add in the Locked On local experts and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. Make the madman Tyler Rowland and the barber Tony Wiggins your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Stash It and Trash It makes its triumphant return, and we're going to start with the good stuff. We've already talked about some bad stuff. Let's talk about some things that make us happy. What are we stashing this week? I am stashing the intermediate to deep passing game, and here's how this nice little tidbit kind of breaks down. Baker Mayfield on Sunday against Washington, when throwing passes beyond the first down marker, was 10 of 12. That's 83.3% completion percentage for 145, 3 touchdowns, and a near perfect 156.6 passer rating. The way this offense looks after week one is a whole lot of high percentage throws down the field by scheming players open, or at the very least, throwing players open. Many of these passes were completed to Godwin, as I highlighted on yesterday's episode, but on passes of 10 yards or more on Sunday, Baker was 5 of 7 for 105 and 2 touchdowns. Oddly enough, Baker was better without play action than he was utilizing play action on Sunday. When using play action, he was only 2 of 4 for 45 yards. Without play action, he was 22 of 26. That's an 84.6% completion percentage for 244 yards and all 4 of his touchdowns. Not sure if they felt they didn't need to utilize play action or if it just isn't going to be a big part of Cohen's offense, but it's something to watch moving forward starting this week against Detroit. For reference, Matthew Stafford against Detroit only used play action on 7 of his 51 dropbacks. So this may be a theme for the Buccaneers offense moving forward. Baker's average depth of target was actually highest when he was under pressure. His average depth of target when pressured was 11 yards compared to 4.3 yards when he had a clean pocket, 5.9 yards when Washington didn't blitz, and 6.7 yards when Washington did blitz. Here's where all of this comes together. I know I just threw a lot of stuff at you. We know how aggressive Dan Campbell is in absolutely everything he does as a head coach in Detroit. He goes for it on 4th down more than pretty much any other coach in the league. And on defense, he wants to bring heavy pressure all the time. This could actually play right into the hands of Liam Cohen and the Buccaneers on Sunday. To the original point, I want to keep seeing these passes going 10 plus yards down the field to go along with Baker's average depth of target under pressure, 11 yards down the field, and the abilities of these wide receivers to get themselves into the right spots and make plays. Baker could have a much better outing this time around than he did in January. Remember, the Bucs got whooped by Detroit 20-6 in October of last year before losing in the divisional round 31-23. So they learned some things between October and January about how to play this Detroit Lions team. Couple of bounces didn't go their way in January. Jamel Dean had an interception that he dropped in the end zone early on that could have kept points off the board for Detroit. Chase McLaughlin missed a field goal. The Bucs were close, much closer than a lot of people want to remember. Offensively, this team under Cohen can go toe-to-toe with just about anyone, but I got to see more of that intermediate to deep passing game from Baker Mayfield. My trash this week, outside of trashing all of these freaking injuries, is a narrative floating around that just it immediately, as soon as I saw it, it got under my skin. But there's a narrative floating around that there's already a running back controversy in Tampa. If you're one of those people, stop it. Knock it off. It ends right now. We knew going into this matchup that the run game was going to struggle, and it did until the end of the game when Bucky was able to break through some gaping holes and take advantage of an overly aggressive defense. The yards per carry difference between Bucky and Rashad is significant. 2.1 yards per carry for Rashad, 6.9 yards per carry for Bucky. Rashad had 15 carries, Bucky had 9. That does not mean that Bucky is a better running back than Rashad. Rashad finished with over 100 all-purpose yards, and he played extremely well. Bucky was just able to take advantage of some blitzes and gambles that Washington's defense made when they didn't make when Rashad was in the game. I promise you, if Rashad had been the one in the backfield when the Commanders ran an all-out blitz and allowed Bucky Irving to get to the second, third, fourth, fifth level on a 31-yard gain, Rashad would have broken free the exact same way. We've seen it from Rashad. We know he can do it. Here's the beauty of it. There doesn't need to be a controversy because there isn't a competition. These two are working together in tandem, and the Bucs offense is all the better for it. I don't care if Bucky averages 3 more yards per carry than Rashad, as long as both of them are effective when they're in the game, no matter what they're asked to do. We can look back at this game and say both of these running backs were effective when they were in the game. Rashad had 4 runs off the left guard and to the left of Graham Barton that got a total of -9 yards. That tells me that Barton and Bredesen were having trouble against the Washington front to get those rushing lanes open. Removing those plays raises Rashad's yards per carry to over 3.6. His best average outside of one run that he had off of worse that went for 15 yards was running behind Barton and Malk, where he averaged 5 yards per carry. But this wasn't a Rashad problem. This was a Barton Bredesen problem. And I haven't watched the all 22, so I can't tell you if it was one, the other, or both. I just know the gap that they were running between Barton and Bredesen. Bucky also had -4 yards when running to that same spot. So again, it's not a Rashad issue. Like Rashad, Bucky was best running between Barton and Malk, which is where he broke off that 31-yard run of his, but he also averaged over 5 yards a carry through that gap, per run. So if you remove the 31-yard run, running through the same gap, Bucky was averaging 5 yards a carry, which is the same as Rashad. They're both good running backs. This is not a Rashad versus Bucky thing. This was an opportunistic, set of circumstances where Bucky happened to be the benefactor. Barton and Bredesen need to figure out why they can't open running lanes for these guys and get that addressed and taken care of and fixed. But this offense is dangerous because they, among others, have both these players, both Rashad and Bucky. That's one of the great things about this offense. It's 1 week. Do not pit them against each other. Be glad that the Bucs have and use both. And Liam, again, I said it in my live afterwards, put them both on the field together more, please. We saw it early in the game. I didn't see it again the rest of the game. Please put both of them on the field together far more often. Thank you. I appreciate that. Todd Bowles reacts to something another coach mentioned. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. The Bucs are 7-point road underdogs in Detroit this weekend with an over-under of 51.5. But if you want to get in on the early action, the Dolphins are 1.5-point home favorites against the Buffalo Bills with a 48.5-point over-under on Thursday night. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Wrapping things up here on a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast, and Todd Bowles was asked about a comment made by former Michigan and current Los Angeles Chargers coach Jim Harbaugh when he mentioned that teams make the biggest jump from weeks 1 to 2. And Todd Bowles, I thought, had a really, really solid reaction to that. And he told the media, quote, "I don't know if you make the biggest jump, but you've got to correct the things that you did wrong in week 1. I think that's going to last all year. Week 1 is more of the unknown, where you don't know what they're going to do and they don't know what you're going to do. And the penalties are high and they're focusing on a lot of things. You want to dial that stuff down. So as far as that stuff is concerned, hopefully that's the case." End quote. This is why I like this response so much. The Buccaneers are, of course, going to make adjustments week to week all season long. Every single team does it. He talked about, Bowles, talked about improvements along the offensive line and what they needed to do. He talked about improvements that can be made with the pass rush, which wasn't as aggressive because of the nature of the opponent. But here's where I think Harbaugh gets this wrong to some degree, at least as it pertains as a blanket statement. It isn't necessarily week 1 to week 2 for everyone. I spent the first third of this show talking about all the injuries that the Bucs suffered and are currently dealing with. They aren't going to make huge strides on the defensive side of the ball from week 1 to week 2 when they go from facing the Washington Commanders, and losing 3 guys in that game, losing 4 total, to playing Detroit in week 2, where they're going to be without the best safety in the NFL. They might still be without all 3 of those corners. We know 1 for sure, but you still may be without Zion and Josh Hayes. We don't know if Logan Hall and Kalijah Kancey are going to be back. The Bucs are going to make those huge strides when they get healthy, when Kancey and Hall and Winfield are all back on the field together, and the Bucs have their full complement of defensive weapons. That's not going to be week 1 to week 2. That's going to be like week 5 to 6, week 6 to 7, like in that range. At some point this year, to Harbaugh's credit, we are going to see a huge shift and jump for the Bucs, but it's not a 1-week thing. And that's, I think, what Todd Bowles was referring to. It's a week-to-week pattern, and at some point, you're going to see these slight changes and these slight tweaks all come together at once. We saw it last year, more so on the offensive side of the ball, when the Bucs went through a really bad run of losses, and then all of a sudden, it seemed like the entire team made a giant leap. They all clicked together and went on that insane winning streak to close things out and get into the postseason. Working on opening up some of those running lanes that I talked about, with Barton and Bredesen, with Yaya and Broswell, and the rest of the pass rush finishing plays and getting sacks. These are the things that are going to come together after the Bucs put all the work in, week out, just repeatedly, week after week after week. And to be fair, maybe the biggest jump for Harbaugh will be week 1 to week 2. The Chargers had a pretty good week 1, but they were playing the Raiders. But maybe that's just how Harbaugh has always prepared his teams. They may make their biggest adjustments moving forward over that span and then do little tweaks and little adjustments, some fine tuning the rest of the year. He's with a new team. And that this past Sunday was really the first time that he got to watch that roster, perform in live NFL action. Yeah, you had the preseason, but that was the first time that he saw his team taking on another team when all the starters were out there, and this was the team that they were moving with going forward. They weren't making roster evaluations. They weren't making cut, keep decisions. So there are probably a lot of changes that he wants to make and is going to make. But Bowles has been in Tampa for a while, and he's been the head coach for a few years. It's going to be a little different for him than it is for someone like Harbaugh. So while I appreciate the stance and kind of the message that Harbaugh was trying to send, as a blanket statement talking about all the teams in the NFL, I just don't think that's accurate. And I thought Todd Bowles answered it beautifully, because it's 17 one-week seasons when you really break it down. Every opponent is different. Every game plan is going to be different. All the preparation week after week, it's all going to be different based on who you're playing. So the Bucs' biggest jump, do not expect them to go out and beat Detroit 41-10. That's just not going to happen. But you're probably going to see some tweaks to the offense, even though the offense looked really good. You're going to see a lot of changes for the defense just based on the personnel that they're going to have available. I just thought it was a really well thought out response and reaction from Bowles, and I love the mentality behind it. Brick by brick, piece by piece. That's how this Buccaneers team is going to win the NFC South. That is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please make sure you're coming back tomorrow. Evan Klosky joins the show for a WTSP Wednesday. Lots to talk about with him. In the meantime, you can check out everything going on over at the 813.tv. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and you can become a Locked On Bucs insider for those one-on-one text conversations with me. No ads or hashtags or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.